be so cool when it's done. This is a knitting channel. So why do I have a sewing pattern? Because today we're going to make a cut and sew project. I'm going to knit big panels of 2-color jacquard fabric, cut out the pieces that I want, and then put them together. I need something to wear to open sauce, which is like VidCon meets Maker Faire. I'm not a featured creator, I don't have a big enough following to be part of that exclusive club. Instead, myself and a few other contributors have a booth to show off AYAB. AYAB is an open source project that lets you retrofit your vintage Brother knitting machine to be controlled by computer. I've been working with and contributing to the project for a few years now, and I want to make something that shows off the full range of what the software is capable of. So I landed on QR codes. A QR code is like a two-dimensional barcode that you scan with your phone and it'll take you to a website. I made a bunch of swatches to make sure that it was possible to do this and to wind up with a QR code that you could scan. This is about the scale that the QR codes need to be so that they're still readable by your phone. And at this scale, this is going to be a nice big graphic print that should photograph well. I'm working with M7533, which is a basic pattern with a bust dart. I wanted it to be pretty simple because this dress is about the fabric and not so much the pattern itself, so it doesn't need any like fancy stuff. The first step is to make a prototype so that I know that this is going to fit me, because I don't want to go through all of the effort of knitting these panels only to make a dress that does not fit. So let's get started. This pattern has a few different options. I'm making dress B so I can ignore the sleeves, and I'm going to bind the armholes and neckline so I can ignore the facing too. I'm roughly cutting out the main dress pieces because I know I need to make a lot of modifications, so I'm just going to trace these. I'm double checking the actual measurements of the pattern pieces so that I can cut the right size. Yes, I iron my pattern pieces. Dry iron, not too hot. You should try it. It will change your life. This is medical exam table paper. It is cheap and a great option for tracing paper. These are my pattern weights. I occasionally have to replace them when I get hungry. I'm tracing out the 14 and then grading to a 16 at the hip. Sewing patterns don't have vanity sizing, so the sizing is different than what you'd find in a store. This is the grain line. The back of this pattern has a center seam for a zipper, but I'm going to make it in one piece, so I'm removing the seam allowance and noting that it is supposed to be cut on the fold. And then I'm squaring up the bottom hem and making sure that the bottom edge has a right angle. And I'm removing the seam allowance from the neckline and the armholes because I'm going to bind these later. I'm transferring all of the pattern markings. I've worked with commercial patterns enough that I've developed my own standard modifications to get something to fit me. I remove 1 inch above the bust and add it back in between the bust and the waist. And this is all done with scissors and tape. It's easiest to do this with a grid ruler and line everything up. And there we go, my standard modifications. This is some leftover neoprene fabric from another project. It should behave about the same way as my knit fabric will, so it's a good option for a prototype. My fabric pen is really starting to dry out. Sharpie to the rescue. Do not do this on something you're planning to wear. Darts go in first. This is another hand-me-down machine, this one from my mom. And we have a dress. It's pretty good. I think I'm going to take in the shoulders a bit though. I'm tracing the new line with a French curve. And then just cutting. That'll work. Now I'm using the cut off edges to transfer the changes back to the pattern paper. It is day 2 of this thing making a QR code dress. Yesterday I got my pattern sorted out and fitted. I needed to make some minor modifications to get it fit a little bit better, but I'm happy with this. But I did forget that this pattern has like an 1 3/4 hem. So I need to put my mock-up back on and see if I actually like where the hem is or if I want to make it shorter or longer, because my dress is not going to have a hem at all. It's going to have the bottom cast on edge will be the hem. So if I want to make it shorter, it'll look really weird and cut off the QR code, and I don't want to do that. I also knit a bigger swatch because I want to test some of the techniques I'm going to use for this. Mostly I need to see if I can just cut into this and how quickly it's going to fray, because either I can just cut into this and then serge the edge later, or I need to cut it on my serger, in which case I'll have to trace out the pattern on the back and then run it through my serger to actually cut the edges and serge it as it goes. It's much easier if I just cut it flat on my table and then serge it later, but I need to see how quickly it unravels. So this is a big piece to work on that. And then I also want to test various techniques for binding the arm and neck line. But I have an appointment to get some vaccines this afternoon, which means that tomorrow both of my arms are going to hurt. Did not plan this out well. So that means I'm going to try to get as much of the panels knit today as possible before my arms hurt, which means I need to get the dress sorted out, because I'm only going to knit just as much as I need. I'm not going to knit any longer than that, so I need to know how long the piece needs to be and then sort it out. And I have a Karen Puzzles timer. I'm going to keep track of how long it takes to knit the first piece so that I can time out the rest of my weekend and see how things go. So let's get this sorted out. I also need to fix the other QR code. Okay, so this QR code points to the AYAB website, which is great, but I wanted to put 2 QR codes on this. Actually, I want to put 3 QR codes on this, but the scale's not going to work out correctly. The other QR code I want to point to my YouTube channel so that when people see me out in the world, they scan it and they can get to my social media. But I need to go and generate that code, and I'm really hoping it is the same aspect ratio. Well, it will be the same aspect ratio. I'm really hoping that it is the same size as this QR code, even though the URL will be longer, and then sort that out in the software and make the pattern I want to make. I think it's just going to be like AYAB, YouTube, all the way up the dress. Okay, I have a bunch to do and not a lot of time to do it in. This is the hem pinned to where the original pattern wants it. It is too short. Oops, missed a pin. That's better. I'll leave it there. First panel is done. This took about 2.5 hours, or approximately 3 episodes of Bridgerton. And I didn't even bother to cast off. I just put some waist yarn on the top and then dropped off the bed and serged it at the end, and then I wound up serging this side as well. I had some issues on the right side of the bed with stitches getting caught and then breaking. Once I figured it out, it was easy to fix it before it became an issue, but I just serged it so that it won't fall apart in the wash, because I do need to wash this. And everything hurts. My arms hurt, my back hurts. I am old. But still, much faster than doing this by hand. Ooh, okay, I gotta go get my vaccines and hopefully I'm more functional tomorrow. But we'll see. This is for sure the biggest piece I have ever knit. And I didn't have any, there are like no imperfections on the right side. There are some minor imperfections on the wrong side. Like down here, we get these lines. I think that happens when the carrot doesn't go far enough past the last needle on the bottom bed and then it doesn't do the lily thing correctly. But, oh my god, it's almost pristine. This is gonna be so cool when it's done! Alright, I gotta go have a professional put some needles in my arms. I'm really not looking forward to that. I am back. So yesterday I made it through, this is the larger swatch that I made, and I cut it out and saw how it worked, and I don't have to serge this right away, it doesn't fray very quickly, so I can cut it flat on the table and then serge the edges later and it's fine. And the dart is a little chunky as expected, but it is also fine. And I was able to press it with a cloth, the yarn didn't melt, so that's good. And I was even able to mark everything on the back with Sharpie and it didn't bleed through at the front. So that's helpful because my fabric marking pens do not do well on this. Whew. And I even tried out a little bit of binding for the neck and armhole, and I did this on my linker, and I'll show you how to do that when we get there. I need to make it a little bigger than this, but it'll work fine. So, now that I'm confident in the techniques that I need, it's time to knit the second panel. My arms don't hurt too much from the vaccines, but it might be a little bit slower than yesterday's thing. And this time I'm doing it on camera. Oh boy. It takes a lot of concentration to do two-color jacquard and not mess it up. So I might just film the intro and then not the rest of it so that I don't mess it up. A couple times on the first panel I thought I'd gotten off and had to like crawl under my knitting machine to look at the back of the fabric to see if there was anything wrong with it. But luckily I didn't. It just takes a lot of concentration for me to go back and forth between the colors and not mess it up and get off because it's really hard to recover from that. Okay. I need to reset some cameras and then it's time to knit the second piece. Okay, before we get started, let me explain what's going on because there's kind of a lot of it. So, this is my Brother 910 knitting machine. This was made in about 1980, so it is older than I am. And as you can see, I have ripped its guts out and replaced them with this custom hardware. This is the AYAB hardware, and it is connected to my computer via USB, where a desktop application is setting up the image correctly and sending individual rows of pattern to the machine. This is a ribber, my KR850. This is dumb. This doesn't do any patterning. The top bed will knit the front of the pattern and the bottom bed will knit just this 1x1 bird's eye backing stuff. And then I have my extension rails attached at the moment. These are so the carriage can slip out onto the rail and like stay in the right position. It keeps the carriage moving more freely because I'm using the full width of the bed to make this panel. Put that back. And then over here I have a color changer. This is actually the single bed color changer, but I have a 3D printed adapter for it that I got off Etsy and I will link in the description. The design files for the hardware are up on our GitHub, but you can buy pre-assembled boards from a gentleman in, I never remember if it's Germany or Switzerland, but I will put his contact information in the description. For this project, I'm using pre-release software. We're getting close to a 1.0 release. The software is still a little buggy, but it is good enough for this project, and it is nice and stable now, so I can knit 4 hours and not have any problems. Really excited about that. We've been working on this for a long while. And as for yarn, I'm using Tam Kitty. It is thinner than the 3-ply Astracryl and is a good weight for 2-color jacquard. And I will link to Knit Knack Shop where I buy all of my Tam yarns below. Okay, let's talk about carriage settings and let me change camera angles. For 2-color jacquard, we need KC2. KC1 does end needle selection and we don't want that because it'll lead to a weird bulky selvage, so KC2. Which hooks into the timing belt on the back and tells the software where on the bed the carriage is. and then both part buttons. So as the carriage moves along, the software will select needles for patterning, and with both part buttons on, only the selected needles will knit, and the rest of them will not. And then on the bottom carriage, we need both flaps up, and these buttons to Lily, and the center is also Lily. It's called Lily because it selects every other needle, and it looks like what it is. So if we bring out a chunk of needles and we have all of the Lily stuff in place, then only every other needle will be selected and come up. And that is how we knit the bird's eye back of this particular piece. On the forward pass, every other needle will knit, and on the way back, the other needle that they didn't knit will knit. And then the color changer I have to do manually. There's no way to do it electronically on this machine. The carriage comes over, I push a button, it switches yarn. Alright, time to actually start knitting. I have broken everything before anything even started. Oh god. Oh, fuck! Alright, I gotta replace the needle now. That's what I get for trying to do stuff without thinking. I am cast onto waste yarn, and now it's time to have the color changer. This project only has 2 colors, and I need to secure these yarns down under the bed somewhere so that I can hook them into the color changer. So what I'm gonna do is drop the bed down just a little bit. Now I'm gonna bring the bed back up, very carefully keeping the yarn near the working area. Because if it gets stuck, it's going to cause a bunch of problems. That is good. And then the first one comes out, and loop it around the thing, and the thing. Second one comes out, loop it around the thing, and under the thing. Okay. And now I can bring the carriage over. I'm going to cut my waste yarn, and then push the one button out and set up for cast on. So I'm canceling the partial knitting, tension 0, tension 0, and then my carriage has picked up the first yarn. And then I set up for circular knitting and bump the tension up a little bit. And then cancel the circular knitting and go to my final tension, which is 3. And we knit. And now we're set up to knit. Great, I have the pattern loaded up on my desktop, and my board is set up and ready to go. So we go KC2, both part buttons, both levers up, Lily, 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 and then that tells me the pattern is loaded and I can start knitting. And all of these should be up, but we're good. Change color. And you know you've done this right if on the first pass from left to right, you have your second color on every other needle, and then on the next pass, you have your second color for every needle because the other ones have knit. And now the needles selected up here are for the next color, which is white, which makes sense because the bottom of this pattern is just white. again, I'm not going to film much of this because it takes a lot of concentration to remember to switch the buttons and do the stuff, and I don't want to screw this up on a piece this big. I am about to run out of white yarn, several rows short of where I wanted to end up. This is not the end of the world, it's just not the way I wanted to end this piece. And if it winds up too short after washing, I can always make the dress a little bit shorter. I did leave a little extra length on the hem. So, let's wrap this up. Yeah, here's the tail end of the white. Never play yarn chicken with a knitting machine. Never. I'm gonna finish this up with the black. So I'm canceling all of my patterning and I'm just gonna knit a bunch of rows. Oh, I always love to watch that. Alright, I'm gonna go serge the top of this real quick so it doesn't fray. Here's my second piece. It wound up a little shorter than I wanted it to be because I ran out of white yarn, but it should still be long enough. I mean, it needs to be blocked in the wash before I know what its final shape is going to be, but I think it'll be fine. And I can always make the dress a little bit shorter if I am out of space, and there is seam allowance on the top of the shoulders as well, which I can cut into and it'll be fine. This is gonna be so cool when it's done! And again, like, perfect. No imperfections on the back even this time. Except for like a few needles that failed to knit on occasion. But here's the front, and here's the front. And I serged the top edge because I am not interested in binding off that much and it'll get cut off anyway. And then here's the other piece. And these need to go in the wash so they can reach their final form, and then I can cut the dress out. This is gonna be so cool when it's done. So these are the two panels that just came out of the wash, and I love them. They're perfect. They could never do anything wrong, except we now have a problem, and it's most obvious on the smaller panel. When I did the math for this, it was fine, but the reality is slightly different, so. The thingy's up. This is the front pattern piece. And as you can see, my knit panel is a little too narrow. We've got about an inch here. And it's also a little too short, which is not the end of the world. I can always make the dress a little bit shorter. And that's probably what I'm gonna do. I need to decide what I'm gonna do about this. So there are a couple options. I could knit an extra panel to go into the side here, but it's really just a small amount. This pattern doesn't have any, I took the seam allowance off the neckline and the armhole because I knew I was going to bind them later, but I left the seam allowance along the side of this and along the shoulder part. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take the seam allowance off of the paper pattern and see just how much extra I need to remove to get my seam to look right. And then transfer that to my mock-up and see how it fits. So this just impacts the hip, and if the hip gets smaller, the dress might be tight to my skin, and then it'll be weird if the top is not also tight, so I might need to make additional modifications, but I need to try it out and see first, because I am not cutting into this panel until I am sure about what I want to do, because this took forever to knit, and also I don't have any more of it. Like, I am out of yarn, and it's not going to arrive before the event, so I need to get this right on the first try. Fun times. We're gonna figure it out, though. Okay, now we have a completely net pattern, and let me write that on this. Okay, that's not that bad. So, looks like I'm only have to take about, like a 1/4 inch, half an inch off the bottom. And then I need at least, so I'm gonna serge the edges of this, so I need at least, here's my prototype. My serger seam is 1/4 inch. So, whatever I need a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this. And this can go into the black, that's fine. So we're looking at 3/8 of an inch plus 1/4. Hey Google, 3/8 plus 1/4.
3 divided by 8 plus 1 divided by 4 is 0.625.
You're useless. 3/8 plus 1/4 is 2/8, is 5/8, is a normal seam allowance. So if I take all of this in by 5/8 of an inch, it should solve my problem. Let me transfer that to my mock-up. I'm just going to mark this directly, and then sew along the line, because that's where we are at this stage in this project. Here is the dress after I took it in by 5/8 of an inch on the side seam, and this is fine. It's absolutely fine. I was really worried about the fabric getting stretched out too much, because with the QR codes, if they get stretched, they aren't scannable anymore. But this is just a little bit less ease, and it's fine. I think I'm going to move the darts in a little bit when I modify the paper pattern, but other than that, like, no problems. This is still wearable. This is still doable. Removing 5/8 from the side seam is absolutely fine. And I had this thought that I could just like leave the pattern like this, because the standard seam allowance for a commercial pattern is 5/8 of an inch, and I could just say like 5/8 of an inch. But I would like to be able to mark along the sewing line so that I can more easily deal with this. So I'm going to actually take the 5/8 off and consider this still a net pattern, and only from the side seam, not from the top here. In doing that, I'm going to perform some surgery on the dart. So what I want to do is move the dart in towards the center of the bust. I'm going to need to fix the armhole anyway when I remove the seam allowance here, so this will help with that. So instead of removing the seam allowance from the outside edge, I'm going to remove it from the inside. And I just draw a line. And then I want to move that in 5/8 of an inch, so let's draw another line 5/8 from that to make it easier to line up. And then we're going to go exactly parallel to that, including the armhole, on top of the dart, and then on the bottom of the dart. Wah! And then I'm just going to pull this out and move it in. And then we'll just line that all back up again. Ta-da! And now I just need to fix this curve a little bit. And I am just eyeballing it because it doesn't really matter. It's an armhole. And there we go. I'm really proud of that. And then I'm going to take half an inch off the bottom. And then now this fits. I have just enough space for the 1/4 inch serger seam allowance. And it's fine. I need to do the same on the back. Okay, here's the back. Here's the front. Let me just mark this, no seam allowance. So I know. And then here's our test here. And yeah, that's gonna fit on there. Before I start cutting out my fabric, I need to replace the blade on my serger. Serger blade. So my serger was a gift. It was a hand-me-down from my grandma, and I've had it for almost 10 years now, and I've never replaced the blade, and I don't want this project to go poorly, so let me do that real quick. And then we'll get to cutting, because I want to be able to quickly cut and then move to the serger and finish off the edges so that it doesn't unravel. Step 1 in replacing a serger blade is read the manual. Open the looper cover. Oh, that needs to be cleaned. There's the old blade. I'll put that off to the side and deal with it later. There's the new blade. Ta-da! It is fixed. This little blade right in here, which you probably can't even see. And now the top. This does not make any sense. Okay, that's clearly for some kind of adjustment. Manual does not have this information. I need to check the internet. I can't figure it out. And I'm just gonna leave it the way it is. Because I couldn't find a YouTube tutorial, I couldn't find a written tutorial on how to do this with this particular machine, and my next result is to pay my mom, and I don't really feel like doing that right now. So I'm just gonna make sure that this currently works in its current state. Here's a scrap from my test piece. And it does in fact still work. I don't think I ever explained what a serger is. This is a machine specifically for working with knits. It creates this edge that you see here, that you see on the inside of t-shirts. It uses multiple threads. Right now mine's threaded with 4 threads, and it's just really, really cool mechanically. And can you even see that? All the parts move. Okay, but it is in working order. And the blades will cut as they sew. That's what I was replacing. It is time to cut the fabric. This is like when you cut into your nice fabric only on steroids, because I spent many hours creating this fabric. Okay, this is gonna be the front panel, so let's put that to the side for now. It's gonna be the back because it's got a few imperfections. Oh, first, I wanted to make sure that my fabric scissors can cut through 2 layers of this. So let's fold this in half. You know what, there's not enough scrap there. There we go. Let's fold this in half and see. Okay, we're good. Okay, I need to remind myself that this is a net pattern, which means it has no seam allowance. So I'm just gonna mark the cutting line. And then I'm going to remove the pattern paper, and then I'm going to cut later. Oh my god. Okay. 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 Alright. I need at least 1/4 inch of seam allowance for the serger seam, but the neckline and the armholes do not need seam allowance, so there we go. From here on out, everything else needs seam allowance. Okay. Okay. All right, I'm gonna quickly turn it over and then mark the cutting line on the other side as well. I mean, the sewing line. Whew. All right, I'm gonna run this through the serger so that there aren't any raw edges to unravel. Nerve-wracking. There we go. Now I just need to do the same thing with the front piece. All right, I cut into my fabric. Nothing went wrong. It's all fine. It's all absolutely fine. There's the front piece that the darts need to be put in, and here's the back piece. Oh, it is just so nerve-wracking cutting into your nice fabric. But everything went fine. All the raw edges are serged. Nothing's gonna fall apart. So I can't just assemble this because I need to bind the neck and armholes. Like, I'm gonna need to seam one shoulder and then bind the whole neckline, and then seam the other shoulder and then bind the armhole, and then bind the other armhole, and then do the side seams. Oh, this is gonna be so cool when it's done. Okay, I have sewn the darts in and pressed them already because that part is boring, and joined one shoulder on my linker. And I need to bind the neckline now, and I want to do that on my linker. Essentially, I'm going to make a strip of ribbing with live stitches on either end, and then sandwich the raw edge of the dress in that ribbing. So I need to figure out how long this needs to be, and normally I do this with a gauge, but because the linker has these needles already and they're already marked with like how many needles per inch, I'm just going to measure out this distance and then count the number of needles I need on here and do my number of stitches that way. And it should be fine because it is ribbing. Okay, I have a strip of ribbing and it's got some imperfections here, but I'm going to hide those on the inside. So the plan is to put the bottom live stitches on the linker like that, and then put the neckline over it like that, and then put the top live stitches over that, and then link through, and that'll make my neckband. But I gotta get the fiddly parts right first, because the needly things have to go through each and every live stitch to make sure that I don't drop any. And the front of it is going to be facing the machine, and the back of it will be facing me, because it makes a like a loopy chain stitch on the back, and I don't want it to be visible. And this strip is too long for the number of needles that I have, so I'm going to do this in multiple parts. But still faster than doing this by hand. So I will tolerate it. I have the armholes and the neckline bound. And now it's time to do the side seams. I could do these on my sewing machine, but I get a little more control from the linker, so I'm going to put this on the linker instead. Here's the dress. It's done. My mom was in town for a few days and she helped me refine some of the fit issues. I'd taken the sides a bit. What else is there to say? Oh, while she was here, she also helped me replace the blade on my serger. So thanks, Mom. And I whipped down the inside edges so that the selvages stay flat and don't pull up and make the side seams all wrinkly and weird. And I'm really happy with this. It's so cool. So the big QR code, when it's on me, is a little too big. Oh, you know what? Let me just try it on. Let me show you. Here we go. So the big QR code, which points to my YouTube channel, is a little bit too big, and with the way that it curves around my body, it doesn't scan very well. But the smaller QR code, which goes directly to the AYAB website, scans pretty well. So I would call this a successful project. This is the biggest piece I have ever knit, and the most complicated piece I have ever knit, and it had no problem. I'm using the pre-release 1.0 software because I've been working on it and fixing it up, and it is nice and stable, and it's great to see that it could do all of this and not have any problems. That's about it for this video and for this project. I am planning to wear this to open sauce. Well, to parts of open sauce. I don't think I wear it the whole time. It's a bit like wearing a blanket, so it might be a little hot. If you're at open sauce, come say hi. We have a booth. It should be labeled on the map thing. And if you are interested in doing something like this yourself, I've got a bunch of videos on how to buy a knitting machine, how to get it set up with AYAB, and how to use AYAB to do techniques like this. So, let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know if you were to make a QR code dress for an event, where would the QR codes point? Yeah, thanks for watching. Happy knitting!